check in with your inner world before you check in with the outer world. And quite often we're just checking in with the outer world real quick. We wake up, we check our phone, we're, bombarded with other people's lives, other people's words, other people's beliefs and way of living. And we haven't even given ourselves the time to check in with ourselves and be like, yo, like, what's really good? Do you know what I mean? Like, how am I
Yeah.
feeling today? So yeah, I would just say just noticing, man, from a non-judgmental, compassionate place. Like not I need to name this, there's something wrong with me, I'm broken, I need to figure out what this means. And getting into the head, just noticing and just being with that. Like, okay, I'm noticing I'm feeling a bit tight in my neck today, or I'm noticing, there's a sense of there's something inside of me that's feeling a bit anxious. And that's another thing, to name that what I just said and how I said it. There's something inside of me that's a bit anxious. I'm noticing something inside of me that's anxious, as opposed to I'm feeling anxious. Because what the
Mm.
noticing and identifying the I from the it allows us to just gently disidentify from the thing so that we can observe it rather than be enmeshed with it and allow it to consume us.
Welcome to the Mindful Rebel podcast, a podcast where mindfulness and leadership intersect. In this week's episode, I had the pleasure of chatting with Mike Simon. Mike is a somatic coach, movement artist, and facilitator based in London. His coaching welcomes the whole self, mind, and body into the co-creative space, allowing the thinker to experience the wisdom within their body and feel comfortable enough to allow the transformative nature of their inner world emerge in service of creating their desired life. Welcome to this episode of the Mindful Rebel podcast. I'm excited to be here with the guest for this episode. Mike, thank you for tapping in and creating space for us to chat today. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm super chilled. Had a busy weekend for some training, but I'm good. Feeling refreshed, feeling resourced, and
Mhm.
yeah, I'm good, man.
Feeling resourced. I like that. I like
Mm.
that. What I want to do, I think, with these conversations, it's always great to sort of find some grounding and a way for us to sort of connect to your journey. So I like to always start out with a question that sort of helps us get there. And so
Mm.
just, how did you get connected to the work that you do? Like, how did your life journey bring you to where you are now as a somatic coach, as well as, a
Hmm.
movement artist and a facilitator?
Yeah. So, in summary, I've had a dance background. So I've danced since I was the age of 11, and I'm turning 35 this year. So I've always danced. I've always had a movement background. I've danced professionally with artists, shows, creating my own work, and all of that sort of stuff. And I would say we're in 2023 now. So over the last 3 to 4 years, certain things have been taking place in my personal life, with regards to my son and my past relationship, his mum. And it came about just after, just post sort of pandemic. I know we had various different, versions of that period, but it came just after the pandemic where I was going through some personal things, with regards to my son moving country. And of course, I didn't want that to happen. And I noticed that if I didn't do something for my own mental well-being, I would find myself in a place that I was in before. So years prior, I can name it now. I didn't know really what it was when I was experiencing it, but with the knowledge I have now, I can name it as a nervous breakdown. And I realized that in the more recent time, a few years ago, with the resurgence of some personal things taking place, it was important for me to seek support, and I sought support in the form of therapy. So I self-referred myself to therapy. There's a charity here in the UK called Mind, and that was a 12-week block of therapy, right? Which was super helpful, and I feel really was a catalyst moment for me to step into the work that I'm doing now. So that really gave me a space, a safe space to offload and speak to someone who was impartial, um, didn't know me, so they're even, and that's weird actually. They don't know me, but there was still a sense of feeling comfortable enough to share in that space with all the things that I'd experienced from my past, and seeing where I am now. During that time, I was going through therapy, obviously navigating, quite frankly, court with with the mother of my son. That's what I was navigating, to kind of name it. And at that same time, I was just reflecting on a business that I had started during the pandemic, which was a men's subscription box service, with the hope of cultivating conversations around male mental health,
Mm-hmm.
because that's something that has always been there and I'm passionate about. And again, because of my experiences, and my hesitance in the earlier days to seek support. Um, I remember going to the doctors soon after I had the breakdown, panic attacks. Um, and I felt like I had to learn how to breathe again because I was just so dysregulated. And I went to the doctors and I was sharing with them, and they gave me a form, right? And I think it was an anxiety and depression form. And I ticked it. And one of those forms where you fill it out, and then the amount of boxes that you check gives a number, and that number basically identifies the possibility of XYZ. So yeah, I didn't like what I saw. I didn't like what I saw on the paper based on my answers, and I remember just screwing it up and throwing it in the bin, you know. And I can reflect on that now, but at that time it was just like, well, I'm not anxious, I'm not depressed, I don't need to do anything, and I just carried on my life. So realizing that I could find myself in a similar space again a few years ago, that's what brought me to the therapy. The mental health and the subscription box, that was very heavy on my mind, and I wanted to do something, so I created that business. And very soon after I created it, I realized that it was out of alignment with what I really wanted to do, even though I didn't have much clarity on that. It
Mm-hmm.
didn't feel in alignment with myself, and also as a business model perspective, as a solo individual, it's a lot. It's a lot of work speaking to suppliers, gathering the products, marketing. It was just too much alongside having a full-time job and a family. It was just like, yo, this is not in alignment. It's doing it's more work, and I just didn't feel like it was a thing. So the therapy, the subscription box, and the Black Lives Matter resurgence, COVID, all of those sort of things were happening around the same time. So as I came to the realization that the subscription box is kind of coming to an end as much as it just started, I was like, okay, I want to do something. I want to speak and share and support and have conversations, but I didn't know what that was. And I stumbled across life coaching. So I did a short Udemy course online for life coaching because I wasn't too sure if it was a thing I would be interested in and whether I was going to invest X amount of money to go on a journey and then, you know, not
Yeah.
really think it's for me. So I did that, started navigating my way on social media and so forth. And also at that time, there was still a yearning for something more, a yearning to connect more of these dots, you know,
Mm-hmm.
together. And that's when I started researching, potentially doing a master's in in dance movement psychotherapy. So bringing my interest of like mental health, well-being, being a service provider in some sort of way, along with my passion and my skill set of as dance, and I was looking to bring those two together. And then I was like, do I really want to go back to study for 3 years and make such an investment again? So again, there was always this is interesting, but is it worth it? Is it something that I really want to do? So I was navigating again, still going down, the rabbit hole. And that's when I came across somatic coaching, or the realm of somatic, should I say. So yeah, it was navigating that space, and also someone that I was following, I still follow him to this day on Instagram, where he hashtags somatics and he was doing movement. So that was kind of like, oh, is somatics linked with movement? And that's how I kind of got into this space. So I found a school who I studied with. And it took some time to kind of find a school that resonated with me, to be quite frank. A lot of the websites and the content that I was seeing, it didn't reflect who I am, in a sense
Mm,
of being a young black man um, from South London, UK. It was a lot of more mature white women on yoga mats,
mm.
which was off-putting, even though I was interested in the content of what was being provided. And it wasn't until I found the school that I studied at that I was like, yeah, this is just a clean website. Sorry, black and white, black and white website. Very clear, very modern, and yeah, I went through it. I inquired on the welcome day, had a conversation with the founder, and before you knew it, I was enrolled.
Nice.
So I guess
You-
that's the big piece. I can't, I couldn't just give a small bit. I kind of had to give all the different pieces
No,
to
you're
bring it.
fine. You're fine. We know that, like, it takes a lot of things to sort of bring us to the points in which we are now. And so I
Mm,
appreciate you sort of weaving the story together that way.
yeah.
And you tapped into an area that I wanted to explore a lot more, especially when you mentioned the idea of like you sort of like stumbled into like the realm of like somatics and
Mm,
in the idea of somatics and as somebody who has like a marketing background, I know a lot of this is coming up quite often more and more now, where we
mm,
see folks talking a lot about somatics, but I don't often hear people really sort of going into detail like, what does that mean? Right? Like, it
mm,
sounds buzzy,
mm-hmm.
it sounds catchy, but like they don't really talk about what that means. So, for some of the listeners who might not be too hip on what somatics, like the work of somatics actually is, could you
Mm.
talk a little bit about that and maybe how that connected to your um, connection to movement.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes. And interestingly, someone just messaged me on I was having a conversation with a friend. They were like, what's a somatic coach? So kind of riffing off of that because it's really fresh, because I'm always really trying to distill the best way to explain it to someone who has no idea what it was. The same position that I was in when I came across it. I was like, I'm seeing a brother moving and dancing. I know he's not a dancer, but he's using the word somatics. Like, what is it? What I tend to say is somatics is supporting individuals with the body and mind. Okay. And what I mean by that is we as individuals, as human beings, a lot of our communication is non-verbal. So if we're solely focusing on the cognitive and the mind and helping someone from that perspective, oftentimes we're missing what's below the line. We're missing what the wisdom, quite frankly, that the body has to communicate with us. So I support individuals to navigate not only how they're thinking from where they are, and this is important, from where they are. It's not therapy where we're looking backwards. Oftentimes the storyteller will share a story which is in the past, and that's okay. That's welcome. However, my role is to support the individual to be more in the present moment and see where they're going moving forward from the cognitive and from the embodied perspective as well. So really cultivating and supporting the both and the conceptual self-awareness, which is one how one thinks about oneself, and the embodied self-awareness, which is how one feels about oneself. So an example I can kind of give to really sort of summarize it. You're tired, you've had a long week, and you're like, yo, I'm gonna sit down and watch some Netflix and order some food or something. You've eaten your food, you've watched a few episodes, you're tired, your body's telling you, I'm tired, I need rest, I want to go to bed. However, you choose to ignore that and override that and stay up and watch a couple more episodes, even though your body's telling you you are tired. And this is a thing that we do, we all do. The Western society is very fast paced. So quite often we're not even attuned or aware of the communication and the signals that our body is giving us to slow down a bit. Um, People call it intuition, sixth sense, however you want to name it. But from a coaching perspective, is very much about that. supporting the individual to make connection with their felt sense, is what, Eugene Gendlin talks about, the felt sense. That feeling where sometimes you can't quite name it, but you know it's there and it's located somewhere, whether that's a tenseness in your chest, whether that's a bit of a ringing in your stomach. All of those sensations, images, reflections, memories are valuable, is valuable information and wisdom. So that is somatic coaching.
Gotcha. Oh, and as you were sharing, I'm like 30 questions just popped up in my head. In a good way though. But I guess one of the questions I would ask you, you mentioned that like our culture is very fast paced. It's
Mm,
presses us to sort of move through. And sometimes we because of that sense of, and I'll go ahead and say a manufactured sense of urgency, we sort of push
mm,
through some of those feelings that we know it's there, but we sort of push through it
mm,
anyway. Do you have any tips for folks who want to more intentionally connect to that felt sense in their bodies, but
mm,
maybe even feel like they just don't know how or have access to in a real tangible way? What tips would you give to
mm,
someone that may be looking to be more connected to that sense?
mm. What comes up for me straight away is curiosity. Curiosity and curiosity and compassion, and non-judgment. All of that encapsulated in the noticing. Taking those moments to be still. A situation may happen at work that may aggravate you, get you a bit agitated. Oftentimes, we don't really take the moment to decompress from situations. We often perpetuate the cycle of frustration and agitation in conversations with individuals who are not able to hold space for that conversation, right? And so, my gentle tip would be to simply bring awareness and notice. It's self-care. A lot of the time I say, like, because I used to do it, wake up, get ready for the workday, and get out the door. Like, that's pretty much it. And it's a practice it has been a practice for me, and I'm continuously iterating it to fill up my cup first. I say, check in with your inner world before you check in with the outer world. And quite often we're just checking in with the outer world real quick. We wake up, we check our phone, we're, bombarded with other people's lives, other people's words, other people's beliefs and way of living. And we haven't even given ourselves the time to check in with ourselves and be like, yo, like, what's really good? Do you know what I mean? Like, how am I
Yeah.
feeling today? So yeah, I would just say just noticing, man, from a non-judgmental, compassionate place. Like, not, I need to name this, there's something wrong with me, I'm broken, I need to figure out what this means. And getting into the head, just noticing and just being with that. Like, okay, I'm noticing I'm feeling a bit tight in my neck today, or I'm noticing, there's a sense of there's something inside of me that's feeling a bit anxious. And that's another thing, to name that what I just said and how I said it. There's something inside of me that's a bit anxious. I'm noticing something inside of me that's anxious, as opposed to I'm feeling anxious. Because what the
Mm.
noticing and identifying the I from the it allows us to just gently disidentify from the thing so that we can observe it rather than be enmeshed with it and allow it to consume us.
Mm. I love the specification around the language of that, right?
Mm,
Making sure that we sort of, and I don't know if it's separating ourselves from it, and I don't know if that's the right words I want to use, but to your point, like not identifying fully into that to say like, hey, I'm anxious. It's like, no, something
mm,
in me that is anxious. And there's
mm,
power in that sort of change of language. I love that you
mm,
brought that up. And there was another thing that you mentioned that I think is worth re-emphasizing, the idea that like, and I think maybe it's just a human thing, is that we typically want to be in a space of identifying and noticing. It's like, oh, there's something in me that feels anxious,
Mm.
and utilizing that level of awareness just for negative things, and like really
Mm.
actually utilizing it also to like notice it's like, wow, I'm noticing joy inside as well, like, or I'm noticing an energy of
Mm.
gratitude as well, like actually sort of expanding that. And it's not just awareness around the negative, but like awareness
Mm.
of like the totality of the experience.
Yes, thank you for naming that as well. Because even myself, I just realized in the examples I've given, the two examples I've given, they had leaned more to the not so favorable. But you are right. It's it's both and, and I try to kind of steer away from the naming of negative or positive, into, especially with regards to feelings, emotions, because I believe everything we feel and experience is an invitation to be curious and inquire. Do you know what I mean? It's not like, oh, that's negative. I need to push it away and suppress it. Like that trigger could be like that could be like the Batman signal. Do you know what I mean? It's like, yo, like you're triggered, yes. It may not be the person that's triggered you. It could be a past story where it's given you the wisdom and the insight to explore that and unpack that for yourself or with someone that can support you, which oftentimes obviously that's the business that I'm in. But that you still have the tools already to be able to navigate things for yourself. However, we all have blind spots, right? So there's some things that we're not able to see in the moment because we're so entrenched in the story or that we're so immersed in the feeling, and all of these things are okay as well. So again, another thing for somatic coaching is everything is welcome. You are the pilot of your body. You are the authority of your body, and you allow your body to lead. I can give an invitation, and if it's not resonating with you or it's not congruent in the session, you ain't got to do it. Do you know what I mean? Like you can be
Yeah.
like, yo, Mike, that doesn't resonate with me. And it's very much somatic coaching is a very much a person-centered, um, bottom-up approach. So both some coaching and therapeutic modalities often work from the top down, whereas somatic coaching works from the bottom up. So it's not heavy on the thoughts, as I said, it's from the body and then bringing up. But we need both,
Yeah.
because the cognitive is what brings us into action. So it's not at the expense of another, it's both.
Let me ask you this question as well. I know you mentioned that, with your subscription box, there was a focus on working with men.
Hmm.
As you've worked as a somatic coach and worked with clients, do you find that this is an easier entry point when working with men, or do you find it to be a more difficult entry point working with men with this idea of connecting, bottom up in that way, or connecting specifically to the sensations and feelings in the body?
The latter,
Mm.
definitely the latter. I Interestingly, when I enrolled on the training that I've done, um, one of my questions, again, stemming from when I was doing the research online, like I said, I saw quite a lot of more mature white women on yoga mats and like tights. I was like, no, this is not for me. Um, so I was curious when I enrolled into the course because it was nothing like that on the website. But I was curious. I was like, what's the percentage of men that have gone through this course or that are in this space? And the founder was very open. He was like, it's very interesting. And to be honest, this space, the proportion between male, those that identify as male, and those that identify as women, it's women that are on the top, not the top,
Mm.
sorry. Women that are There's more women compared to men. And then you go that step further for me, personalizing it as a black man with locks and a gold tooth and my nose pierced, and you know what I mean? It's obviously, yeah, I'm painting a picture, but that's something that I struggled with, to be
Yeah.
quite honest, when stepping into the space, kind of like that representation or lack thereof, like like how people are gonna vibe with this, right? So back to your question, um, I tend to find it is more conversations, or inquiries or clients, women, and the men that do feel the call to step in or are curious enough there's a level of work that I sense they have already done.
Mm.
Um, in terms of their openness and willingness to step into such a space where it could be vulnerable for them. And I find that very interesting. And when I first started doing this coaching thing, before I even got like finished my qualification, I was solely focusing on like the men's space, a men's coach and all of that stuff. But I've broadened, it's not just men that I work with, it's both men and women. However, there is still and always will, I feel, be that calling to want to support men in such a capacity to cultivate a broader sense of self-awareness and to stop for us, the big us, the collective we, to stop suppressing our emotions. And this is systemic, man. Like
Yeah.
it's not just a case of just telling a brother, you know, feel how you feel. Like it's systemic. It's something that has been there for a very long time. Even with um more recently, Michael B. Jordan and my guy from Creed, like that all of I'm seeing
I was going to ask
ASAP
you about
Rocky.
that.
Yeah, I mean let's flow into it, like ASAP Rocky, all of that. And I'm just like, here we have black men showing a level of affection for each other, which is not sexualized, it's none of that. And people have a hell of a lot of stuff to say, which is not moving the conversation in a more favorable direction. Do you know what I mean? It's further diminishing us as men, us as us as human beings first and foremost, in the physical incarnation of a male body. It's damaging us. And then when I see it's black men, it's just another thing, man. And it's just like, why do we keep doing this? Why do we keep doing this?
Yeah, and you know what's interesting because specifically to your point with the with ASAP Rocky and the cover, the Vogue
Mm,
cover with Rihanna, and the situation, the pictures with Jonathan Majors and
that's his name.
Michael B.
Yeah,
Jordan.
yeah.
It's interesting watching the narrative because I don't think people realize how much they play into the narrative based on their comments. Like there are so many comments that like
Mm,
I'm scrolling and I'm looking at how people are processing this and it's like, well yeah, they shouldn't be that affectionate or they shouldn't be doing this or they shouldn't. It's so many
mm,
shouldn'ts that I'm like while you think you're probably adding or helping, you're actually piling on to this systemic issue and the reasons why.
mm-hmm,
And it's like so many times I see these conversations around how men show up in spaces, how black men show up
mm,
in spaces. And from those conversations, it's like I understand why people don't express themselves, right? Like there's so many
mm,
sort of situations that I see that I'm like, this is the reason why. Like because when someone does
mm,
it, like y'all jump on them and attack them from so many different
mm,
angles. And it's just
mm,
it's hard to see sometimes when we see these big dialogues happening where it's like, really, if we approach this from a different way, there could be some movement. But it's like every time there's something, someone shows us, a black man shows a different
mm.
way of being, a different way of existing with themselves or with other people. It's like the narrative just sort of gets taken in the conversation, almost gets like reductive in a certain way, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think I may even have commented on one of the posts. I don't even know because I try and stay away from that sort of stuff. I see it and I'm like, okay, cool. But some people are reaching. It's a reach. Like the comments, you're reaching in the comments, and it's just like, why? And there is a why. There is a why. I'm not too sure what it is, and I haven't taken the time to unpack that. But what I do feel is that it's really not helpful. It's not helpful. We've got um black men taking their lives, and I don't want the conversation to solely focus on that. People of all creeds, colors, shapes, and sizes, beliefs, they get to a point where that may be the case, but it doesn't need to be that way, man. It doesn't
Yeah.
need to be that way, and I feel that there definitely needs to be more spaces that are inviting for men of color to feel held, feel seen, felt supported to navigate life. Because I feel that, like, I know for me as a black man, like we come into the world. I came into this world, I feel, with like things already on my back that
Yep.
you kind of have to shift, right? Like I remember my grandma saying to me, like when I was younger, she used to work, she was a librarian. So she was always she was in the school system. And she'd be like, make sure you read your books. Like before I even got over the threshold of her front door, I was being quizzed with my times tables. Like that was just a standard thing. I used to hate it, you know, because I wasn't confident with maths. But what always sort of stood out to me was the belief, the idea that because I'm a black boy, I need to work 10 times harder than my counterparts who are not from that background. I was like 8 or 9. Do you know what I mean? So that's coming from then. Then there's the masculine, the macho-ness, the big black guy, the our physical parts being glamorized. And this stuff stems back to slavery. I don't know
Yeah.
if you read the ISIS papers. That book was like blew my mind when I read that. And it talks about all of these things, the phallic symbol that's being adorned, and it's slavery. And these things have continued to move forward because as black men, we're supposed to show a level of strength and we're not to show any weakness and all of these sort of things. And it's like, man, our people aren't helping our people at all.
Yeah.
Like we really aren't.
Yeah,
So
like
yeah.
no, you're hitting the nail on the head. I mean, I feel like, and I say this all the time. I feel like I'm 36, and I feel like
Mm,
my 30s and late 20s have been like unlearning. There's been a lot of unlearning, right? Like it's less
mm,
of I'm yes, I'm still taking things in, but a lot of my work has been around unlearning a lot of the things that I feel like socially have been put on me that it's like,
mm,
is this me, or is this a social construct that I'm leaning into or
mm,
entertaining in a way that I don't necessarily have to? And a lot of that, you start to realize that it's either impacted generationally, right? Something that we picked up
mm,
generationally, something that we've picked up in our immediate household. Like for me, I had to, as I grapple with the idea of like grind culture and like burnout and stuff, I'm like, where the hell did this come from? And I'm like, I grew up seeing my mom work 2 or 3 jobs, and like
mm,
those kind of things that just sort of get ingrained in us, and then we're like, okay, well, that's how you need to, like, to have a sense of worth. That's what you need to do
right.
to sort of navigate and move in the world. And
Mm,
as I've sort of been unpacking things, I'm like, okay, well, I can actually drop that and let that go, because that's not how there's more choice in it than we sometimes give ourselves credit for, of like, what can I drop off to make space
yeah,
for some who I truly am in that way.
totally. And on that piece, just segue from that because it's quite alive in me right now. Because I've had conversations. I've been like, how did my grandparents, more so my grandparents, and my parents also work hard, and yeah, worked and continue to work hard. But like my grandparents, like they was able to buy a house for like £2,000 when they came over from Guyana, South America. That's where my family's from, right? And there's something interesting about what you said about like the hustle and the grind culture and the relationship between what you've seen in your own household and all of that. And as that's come up, it's made me think, the the pressure that in our current time that we put on ourselves in order to get ahead, could it be that some of that is coming from the fact that we saw our grandparents, parents, people before us work hard, and their efforts amounted to material things that they was able to obtain,
Yeah.
right? Whereas now we put in that same effort. The average general person puts in that same effort. I've done the 2, 3 jobs and stuff like that, right? But it doesn't amount to the same outcome. And I'm wondering if there's something in there that we're overexerting ourselves to almost get to that similar thing that you understand, you know where I'm kind of
Yeah.
going with that? Like, are we
Yeah.
pushing ourselves that bit much more further now. Like our grandparents were able to do it. So if they would do able to do it, we can do it, but we're not able to get the things that they got. So we got to work even more. Do you know what I mean? And it's this constant more, 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 more. And then we're seeing people that have some of the things that we want, and it's like, I want that too. So I'm gonna keep going. Burnout, bro.
Yeah.
That's burnout.
Listen, you listen. You're segueing into it because I wanted to talk about. There was a post that you posted. I want to say maybe a week or two ago that
Mm,
like I had to like sit with it for a little bit. Like I read it and I'm like, huh.
mm,
I feel it, and I think you said burning yourself out for the bag is not a boss move. Um,
uh,
and yeah, that one sort of hit me
did
kind
it
of
hit you?
hard. Yeah, and I'm
In
like,
what? I'm curious. In
mhm,
what? How? Because that particular post, and I'll give you some context behind it in a minute, but that
mhm.
particular post has cultivated a lot of conversation, and this is like the first sort of inter, apart from digitally, the interaction. So I'm curious, what was it that landed for you with that?
Yeah, I think that for me, it's this idea of, and I think for it's stuff that I've been unpacking around scarcity mindset, right?
Mm,
Understanding sort of how
mm,
I've grown up and feeling the need to hustle and even hustle
mm,
when things feel like they're on a right foot, right? Like where it's like, no, actually things are good. Why are you still busting your ass,
mm,
right? Where it's like you
mm,
actually could scale back, you actually could relax a little bit, you actually could make more room for rest, stillness, play, fill
mm,
in the blank. But
mm,
because you're so attuned, like I feel like one of my sort of natural gears is to like work, right? Like I'm a
mm-hmm.
grind. I'm like, oh, I'm off today. I got a few hours. Let me go work on something real quick. And so
Right.
realizing that I was, even though I would say over the last couple of months things have been flowing pretty well and pretty aligned, I'm still
Mm,
sort of in that grind gear, if that makes sense. And
mm,
it reminded me to slow down and really think more intentions. Like, do you have to be out here busting your ass like you are, or could you ease up on some things, let some things go, relax on some things, say no to some things, and still be okay? And so that was one of the things that sort of it triggered in me whenever I saw that post.
I appreciate that, man. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Um, but yeah, you wanted to ask me about that particular post, where it came from.
Yeah, yeah, I'm curious, and I know as a, as someone who creates content too, it's like a lot of that is coming from, things that we're experiencing in life, right? Where like maybe
Mm-hmm.
there was a aha moment or something that sort of resonated for you to write that or create that post.
Absolutely.
Yeah, what
What
caused
was
that
it?
post to, yeah.
Man, I was on a Zoom meeting, paying no damn attention. I had my notebook here, and I genuinely don't know what initiated that thought, that stream of consciousness. I don't know. I couldn't really tell you, but maybe unpacking it a little bit now, it may have been the fact of me being like, why am I in this Zoom meeting? Like, why am I here? Why am I spending my time doing this when I would rather do something that's a bit more enriching and fulfilling for myself? And I literally had my note, like similar setup like this. I'm on the Zoom meeting, I had my notepad here, my pen. I think my phone was like here. And I was just like, yeah, the bag, money. Burning yourself out for the bag is not a boss move. And I was like, oh, I was like, oh, okay. And then I started, and then I just kind of let it flow. So it very much was that. And I feel that what's what's the saying? What's calling for your attention often wants your attention. So that's in me because I too
Mm,
can resonate with the fact of if I've got a day off, I'm itching to do something. So anything that I share, content creation wise, it's like it's a lived experience or something that I've unpacked or processed in myself. Do you know what I mean? So I'm not sharing something to be like, oh, you know, I'm not chasing the bag, or it's not so much that it's a very broad perspective, and to cultivate these conversations. Do you know what I mean? Like I've definitely been in burnout, and I could very easily get back there if I don't maintain a level of awareness to check in with myself. You see all these links, bro? Like to check in with myself on like what am I doing? Do you know what I mean? How can I systemize my week in a way that allows me to have the time that I need to do the things that I want to do without overexerting myself and still having time for myself and still having time for my partner and still having time for my son and my partner's son and all these sort of things. How can I orchestrate my life to have more ease and to be fulfilling without expensing and without what's the word I'm looking for? Without efforting too much.
Mm,
Do you know what I mean? Like I want
yeah,
what I would love the good life. You know, the good life where everything that I'm doing is fulfilling me
yeah,
and I can support others to pour into them as well. I don't want to be working for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, paycheck to paycheck. You know, like I want to be fulfilled. And the scary thing is, quite a lot of people settle for that as the status quo because that's what we've been taught from the system, from an education system. From the moment, I mean, here in the UK, it's four. You go into nursery school, reception, you go through the ranks. From there, you go to secondary school. From there, you're encouraged to, well, now I think you have to go to college. And then some may go to university. So you're being trained to work in a system for the large proportion of your life to then retire and potentially struggle financially because your pension doesn't reach too far. I mean, I don't know about you, that ain't it. Not for
nah.
me anyway. That ain't my portion. That is not my portion. For some people that works, right?
Yeah.
But for me, there's always been something there that has been anti that. Although I've done the school, I've got the degree, I've done the jobs, and there's always been something that it hasn't fully sat with me, man. Hasn't really fully sat with me.
Yeah, I'm definitely with you there, and I think that that's a good segue into the next question I wanted to ask you. And I'm sure you probably see this as a coach. I see this in my coaching practice too sometimes. But and I think part of this is society sort of framing or packaging like transformative work as like quick
Mm,
fixes, right?
mm,
Like that, like growth and transformation is something like, hey, this can happen. Like, talk to me for one session, and that's gonna fix your
mm.
life. How do you combat that or work through that with the folks that you share space with, highlighting the idea that growth and transformation takes time, right? Because I think that there's so many folks like and again, we see how it's marketed, we see how it's shared with folks, how it's talked about online, but like growth takes time. Transformation,
Mm,
real like sustainable growth and transformation takes a lot of time.
mhm.
How do you broach that with the folks that you work with?
I think it really starts with my content because that's the segue for communication for me currently at this time, anyway. So, quite a lot of the content I share is the encouragement to slow down, the encouragement to flow with your own at your own pace and at the pace of of your body. Do you know what I mean? Not at the pace of where your mind necessarily wants to get to because I'm 35 and by now I should have a house and a wife and all these sort of things. Like that's like the human time, right? But I think I've shared and I'm getting quite into it in terms of like nature and just observing nature and like the ecology of what we have around us. And the tree ain't rushing to grow. The plant ain't rushing to grow. The caterpillar isn't rushing to transform. In fact, if you try to rush the process for a caterpillar into a butterfly when they're in the cocoon metamorphosis stage, they will die, or they won't be. They at the very least they won't be strong enough to embody the butterfly, right? And I think that's important to understand. And this is where I'm starting to see the interconnectedness with us as human beings with nature, is that we are one with nature in that way. However, we're kind of going on our own way and be like, yeah, we need to get this quickly. It's like, bro, like you'll plant a tree and come back in 200 years, the tree will be there, but it took 200 years for the tree to grow with, the right conditions, being watered, being protected in some way, shape, or form. And in that process, it's grown, it's shedded, it may have been broken, in certain part, attacked, eaten. Like obviously I'm using these things from a tangible sort of perspective in that sense. But if we were to relate these things to us and the human journey, we go through seasons. We go through moments of growth. We go through moments of stillness. I don't want to use the word stopping. We go through moments of stillness. We go through moments of reflection and looking back on what was. We go through moments of maybe not even um what's the word? Not noticing. Kind of, you're like, oh, this is me, sort of thing. I would imagine if a plant was able to have that intelligence, it'd be like, oh, I didn't realize this shoot was here. Do you know what I mean? Because it's just happening. It's happening. It's unfolding in the moment. And when it comes to the process of my practice in coaching anyway, it's not a quick fix. Yes, I do have an offer, which is a sort of a one-time thing from an investment perspective, and also from a perspective of if you have one particular inquiry and that particular inquiry, we can go there. We can kind of go straight there, right? That doesn't mean that you're going to leave the hour session and your whole life around you has shifted to accommodate the insights that have emerged from that session. There's an integration process, to integrate these new learnings, to embody those new learnings and that way of working, which takes time. And what that time is not constrained to just on your clock. Do you know what I mean? Like I went through the things that I've gone through, and I had the breakdown in 2015. It took me until 2020 something to feel brave enough and done with it, or somewhat, yeah, afraid of finding myself in that similar position to do something about it. That took several years. Now, I'm not saying everyone's journey is going to be like that with whatever they are experiencing or whatever, but it just goes to show that you can't rush these things, man. Do you know what I mean? You can't rush them. Like you may want to, and that alone is interesting. That sort of, I want to move fast. I was ill. You can probably hear it, right? I'm still a bit bunged up, right? Um, I so badly wanted to do things, but my body was like, bruv, you gotta chill. Like you need to heal, you need to rest. There was a conflict in myself. I was sensing a conflict in me because I want to do something, but the physical capacity I had was not there. So yeah, circling back to your question.
No, you're good.
Circling back to your question, I think it really just comes to the conversation. I've never really had anyone kind of come to me with this um, burning desire for their life to change like straight away. Of course, that's the conversation. I've been working on XYZ for so long. I really want to break through. Cool. But my role is to support them and be like, yeah, I can support you with these things. And the thing is not often always the thing. You can come to me with something, and 9 times out of 10, there's a whole load of other stuff that will unpack out of that, which will probably be out of your awareness, the blind spots, right? Which is why it's not just the one thing, because in the process, other things will likely unfold. So we can have a bespoke journey of navigating things together, me holding space for you and me following and supporting the lead of you, because ultimately this is your journey. I'm here to hold the space and support you. So yeah.
Listen, Mike, what I want to say before we close out, this has been a great conversation, man. I'm sitting here like, yeah, just a great conversation. Before we close out, as my listeners, I always like to share something tangible that the listeners can sort of take away. And For the folks that are
Yeah.
listening on this episode, we, sort of started the conversation with the idea around somatics and really connecting and listening to
Mm,
our bodies. What's one thing that folks could do, post listening to this podcast or this episode that could
hmm
help them move into the direction of being more connected to their physical bodies in a more intentional way?
mm. I would definitely say the kind of practice that I said about orienting, um, bringing awareness. You can take take 2 minutes, bringing awareness to your environment, and then bringing awareness to your body from the ground up. So bring awareness to your feet, up your legs, your thighs, etc. Bring yourself into a mindful space, and then check in with yourself. I do have a whole guided audio practice which is for free, so that could be shared out with whomever's listening, where that is guided. But if it's something that you want to do independently, you can do that too. Because in all of this, it's about um, the individual having agency and empowering you to know that you have the tools already. It's just sometimes we need that space to support us on the journey. So yeah, orient in your space, bring awareness to your body, check in and notice what may be emerging for you from your body. May it be you can feel your heart. May it be you can sense the breath coming out through your nose. May it be that you can feel some tightness in your ankle. Start there, along with journaling. I'm a strong supporter of journaling, because I find that really helped me. Even before I knew what journaling was, I would write. So you can bring those. I like to bring those two together. Kind of with a lead in. Um, and yeah, but as I said, I've literally what I've expressed, and this wasn't a plug for the
No,
free offering, but literally what I've just expressed, I have that available for anybody to download. It's the guided audio with some journaling prompts to bring an embodied sense of clarity to yourself.
and let me ask you, and this is another question I want to ask, because
Mm,
I loved the idea of journaling, and it's something I've been leaning into a little bit more. And I've talked to people about the idea of journaling, and there's always a bit of friction when it comes to like writing stuff down. Um,
mm,
how do you encourage people to be more connected to actually like writing out what comes from their practice in that way? Because I know sometimes it can
mm,
feel, and I think there's a lot of layers around sort of what keeps us, there's a whole perfectionist, and let me speak for myself. I
mm,
have, as someone who's worked in the academy before, I have this weird sort of sense of like, this is going to be some sort of deep research paper and people are going to see this. And so I get sort of
mm,
that analysis paralysis around like trying to write stuff down, but just sort of
mm,
freely jotting things down has been really helpful for me, of like getting it out of my head, out of my
mm,
body, out of my experience, and writing it down. Any tips that you have for
mm.
people who may be looking to incorporate journaling a little bit more that might help them ease into the experience?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for me, I generally free flow, or I ask myself the question after I check in. And sometimes I don't even check in with myself with like the guided thing that I shared. Sometimes I could literally the first thing I write is be like, how am I feeling right now? So I've literally just woken up like, how am I feeling right now? And I answer as honestly as I feel I'm able to. But aside from that, because that may be challenging for individuals, start doing gratitude lists.
Mm.
Title, gratitude. Um, challenge. I was trying to find a different word, but challenge yourself to write down 3 to 5 things that you're grateful for. That's it. I would start there. 3 to 5 things that you're grateful for. Try and commit to that intentionally every day, and then look back on it. That's the start of a practice. If you don't have a question or a prompt, or you don't know what to write because you feel there's nothing there or nothing's gonna come, start there. I was speaking with a friend who shared that they were journaling, but he didn't like what he saw when he wrote things down. And another thing I've never tried this personally. I've never been in this particular position, and quite often I don't always read back mine. I've got so many journals, I don't often read them back. That's just me. But how might it be to do that, journal, and then maybe make a ritual out of it? Whether you rip that piece of paper out and burn it, or you rip it and fold it somewhere and put it in a keep safe place to maybe look back on at a certain time. But, it's a process. And if you are finding yourself maybe unpacking some things that are quite deep, see if you can if you can seek support to support you in navigating that. It doesn't make you weak, it doesn't make you incapable or less than. We are interdependent. Like we're not supposed to do this thing alone. It's about
Mhm.
us being together. And that always when I kind of end with that, and I guess we can leave with this. Um, the African proverb: if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together.
Mm, mm. That's a mic drop if I heard one. Mike, this has been great, man. Yeah, thank you for creating a space for us to talk and connect in this way. I know my listeners are going to want to connect with you after this. What are the best
Mm.
ways that they can connect with you? What offerings do you have available? Feel free to share it.
Yeah, so my Instagram is the Mike G Simon. Um, and I'm also that on Twitter as well at the Mike G Simon. That's the best way to connect with me. Like you can segue into emails and all of those things there. Um, in terms of offerings, I mean, always, like what I was speaking about before, it's called the Embodied Clarity Workbook, which is a guided somatic audio, which is orienting, which I was sharing briefly in this call. And then you get the guided workbook, which kind of has some prompts and something to read for yourself as well. And then also afterwards, very transparently, I send a few emails afterwards to kind of check in and share a bit more about myself, and give you some more tools on how you can, create your sacred sanctuary, your own space for you to kind of do your thing, whether that's meditate, reflect. I see you got your space, in like that Zen Den sort of thing, So that's one thing, and also my newsletter. So Musings from Home is my newsletter that I recently started. So two emails in. It's a monthly newsletter where I share reflections on the month past, any tools and tips with regard to like the somatic realm, and topics of cover are like parenthood, fatherhood, creativity, spiritual philosophy, and lifestyle design. So it's a big sort of amalgamation of things that I'm interested in, and I'm sure that the listeners maybe for those that are already connected with me as well. So both of those links are available via my Instagram, or if there's a drop down link, I don't know how you're going to put this out there, it can be available there as well.
Yeah, so everything that Mike shared will be in the show notes. So whether you're listening or watching on YouTube or listening on whatever platform, click down in the show notes. You'll be able to find those links, click directly to connect in those ways. And I would advise you to do that. So yeah, listen, Mike, thank you again so much, man. This has been a pleasure. Look forward, we got to keep the conversation going at some
Yes,
point too.
definitely, we must, man, we must, because I think it's important, and it's a beautiful space that you've carved out, and obviously thank you so much for the invitation to chop it up with you, man. It's been great.
Oh man, thank you so much, man.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Mindful Rebel podcast. Take a moment to go down into the show notes and follow my guests on all their platforms or check out their website, because I know you enjoyed the nuggets of wisdom they shared with you in this episode. While you're in the show notes, take a moment and go to my website. That's ShawnJMoore.com to stay up to date on any upcoming offerings I have to share. And then also subscribe on your favorite podcast platform to catch the next episode of the podcast. Thank you so much, and until next time, move into the rest of your day with a greater sense of peace, clarity, and freedom.